On June 19, 1944, the US and Japanese navies clashed in a decisive battle in the waters near Saipan in the Mariana Islands. The two sides committed a terrifying force of 24 aircraft carriers and roughly 1,350 carrier-based planes. The battle, however, ended with the Japanese losing 3 aircraft carriers and 378 aircraft. With that, Japan lost naval supremacy in the Western Pacific. Its main carrier fleet was devastated, and its carrier-based air power was all but wiped out. This shift in momentum allowed the US military to shake off its early war slump. Using its island-hopping strategy, its forces pointed straight toward the Philippines, a key forward base for the Japanese Southern Army. The plan was to use superior military strength to crush the entire Japanese presence in Southeast Asia in one decisive battle. By this point, Japan had already lost defensive lines at Saipan, the Mariana Islands, and elsewhere. If the Philippines fell, the empire's southern resource line would be severed, cutting off Southeast Asia from the Japanese homeland. Therefore, the Philippines was a place the Japanese army would defend to the death. Even late in the war, knowing they couldn't possibly hold back the American advance, the Japanese military unleashed a secret weapon that would stop hundreds of thousands of US troops in their tracks. So what was this great battle really like? And could Japan's so-called secret weapon actually halt the Allied offensive in the Pacific? In the early days of World War II, the Japanese military was dominated by the Army and the Navy. The two branches were split into opposing factions: the Strike North faction, represented by the Army, and the Strike South faction, championed by the Navy. The Strike North plan was to use the 3 provinces of Manchuria in China as a starting point, drive north, and form a pincer movement with Germany to attack the Soviet Union, eventually linking up with their allies in Moscow. The Strike South plan involved conquering all of Southeast Asia to cut off old colonial powers like Britain and France from their colonies, then occupying Australia. From there, their forces would be aimed directly at the United States across the ocean. To carry out this strategy, the Japanese military engaged in an arms race early in the war. A large number of aircraft carriers and strategic warships were launched one after another. By the outbreak of the Pacific War, the Japanese Navy's tonnage had reached a staggering 1.19 million tons, the 3rd largest in the world. Although its total tonnage was slightly less than that of the United States and Great Britain, the American and British navies were more geographically dispersed. This meant that in the Pacific region, the Japanese Navy was actually stronger than the combined British and American forces. In fact, after the Allied victory in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, there was intense debate on how to press the advantage and truly threaten Japan. Some advocated for bypassing the Philippines and attacking Taiwan directly, while others supported leapfrogging both the Philippines and Taiwan to strike the southern part of Honshu. In the end, future 5-star General of the United States Army Douglas MacArthur prevailed over the dissenters. He decided to first retake the Philippines and then capture Okinawa. General MacArthur had a special connection to the Philippines. After the Battle of Bataan in April 1942, over 36,000 American soldiers surrendered or were killed on the Bataan Peninsula, marking the largest surrender in US military history. MacArthur himself narrowly escaped capture. For both the US military and MacArthur personally, it was a humiliation that would never be forgotten. For that reason, the battle for the Philippines was a fight for redemption. In the fall of 1944, a determined MacArthur led the Southwest Pacific Area forces northward, while Admiral Nimitz commanded the Pacific Fleet to sweep westward. The two powerful forces formed a pincer movement, rapidly closing in on the Japanese-occupied island of Leyte in the central Philippines. Leyte is located southeast of Luzon and north of Mindanao, guarding the strategic choke point of the Surigao Strait, making it a critical location in the Pacific. Seizing Leyte would mean cutting off sea traffic between the Japanese mainland and the Dutch East Indies, preventing Japan from plundering more resources. Militarily, taking Leyte meant severing the Philippine archipelago in half. From there, US forces could methodically isolate Japanese garrisons and destroy them one by one. In September, US Admiral William "Bull" Halsey, leading the Third Fleet, began launching attacks on the Philippines according to plan. Initially, Halsey proposed making Leyte Gulf the first target, rather than Mindanao as previously thought. With MacArthur's enthusiastic support, the Joint Chiefs of Staff ultimately approved the suggestion. The Japanese, however, misjudged the situation. They believed the American target was Luzon, the largest island in the Philippines. Japanese Admiral Tomoyuki Yamashita's 14th Area Army was deployed there, constructing inland defensive lines. It wasn't until the American invasion fleet appeared in Leyte Gulf that the Japanese High Command realized the attack was aimed elsewhere. Late on the night of October 18th, the Imperial General Headquarters issued the order for Operation Show 1. The commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, Admiral Somu Toyota, ordered his forces to defend Leyte to the death. According to the plan, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, which included the powerful super battleships Yamato and Musashi, would act as the upper jaw of the pincer. They would sail east from Singapore, via Borneo, through the San Bernardino Strait, and approach the Philippine archipelago from the open sea. Meanwhile, Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura's southern force would serve as the lower jaw of the pincer. They would pass through the Surigao Strait and enter Leyte Gulf from the south. The northern and southern jaws would then snap shut, crushing the American Navy. During this time, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's northern force, a weaker fleet, would provide cover by acting as a decoy. With battle imminent, how would the naval engagement between the US and Japan unfold? At 8 a.m. on October 22nd, Kurita's fleet advanced toward Leyte Gulf from the north along the Palawan Passage. At 3 p.m., Nishimura's formation also began its approach from the south. On the night of the 22nd, two American submarines, the USS Darter and USS Dace, patrolling off the coast of Borneo, spotted Kurita's advancing fleet. They immediately radioed the Third Fleet. Upon receiving the report, Admiral Halsey ordered his fleet to prepare for engagement. At 5:32 a.m. on the 23rd, Commander McClintock, eyes glued to the growing blips on his radar screen, gave the order to attack. Aboard his own ship, Kurita was standing on the bridge when he suddenly felt a violent shudder beneath his feet, followed by a massive explosion. His flagship, the Otago, took 4 torpedo hits and began to sink. As Kurita scrambled to escape, he saw the heavy cruiser Maya get torn apart by another torpedo. Within minutes, both ships had sunk to the bottom of the sea. In this initial encounter, the Japanese Navy suffered heavy losses, while Halsey had pinpointed the location and strength of the Japanese fleet. Ozawa, approaching from the north, learned that Kurita had been attacked by submarines and quickly sent out an uncoded message, hoping to draw Halsey's attention. But all American aircraft had been dispatched west to monitor Kurita's fleet, and they failed to spot Ozawa's bait. In the early morning of October 24th, Kurita's fleet was spotted by American reconnaissance planes after entering the Sibuyan Sea south of Mindoro. Shortly after, Nishimura's fleet in the Sulu Sea, along with a follow-on reinforcement fleet under Admiral Shima, was also detected by U.S. aircraft. Halsey decided to focus his attack on Kurita's fleet. At 10:40 a.m., U.S. carrier aircraft descended on Kurita's fleet. For an entire day, 2 of Halsey's carrier groups launched 5 massive air raids against Kurita, involving 250 planes. How would Kurita respond to this crisis? As the air-sea battle began, 9 American planes were shot down in an instant, but the remaining aircraft pressed their attack on the Musashi. The Musashi was a colossal battleship with a full displacement of 72,000 tons, hailed as an unsinkable warship. Yet, facing the swarming American planes, its 152 guns firing in unison couldn't hold them off. After enduring 5 full waves of attacks, the Musashi was hit by a total of 20 torpedoes and 17 heavy bombs and finally sank. As the battle raged, Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome's force of over 180 land-based aircraft attacked U.S. forces in the Philippine Sea in 3 waves. They struck Rear Admiral Sherman's Task Group 38.3 and sank the light aircraft carrier USS Princeton. Despite this, after 5 rounds of American air raids, Kurita's fleet was ultimately forced to retreat from the Sibuyan Sea. At 4:20 p.m. on the 24th, Kurita's withdrawal was spotted by an American reconnaissance plane. Halsey, however, concluded that the Japanese fleet was heavily damaged and fleeing in disarray, so he held off on another attack. It wasn't until 5 p.m. that American planes finally discovered Ozawa's decoy fleet about 200 nautical miles off the northeastern coast of Luzon. Overjoyed at the news, Halsey immediately ordered his fleet to leave its defensive position and pursue Ozawa's force, walking right into the enemy's trap. Kurita's fleet, which had seemingly retreated, now turned around and charged back toward the American landing beaches, putting the U.S. forces in peril once again. At dawn on the 24th, Nishimura's fleet, approaching from the south, radioed Kurita that they expected to reach the center of Leyte Gulf's eastern shore by 4 a.m. on the 25th. Just after midnight, Nishimura led his force into the narrow Surigao Strait, where Admiral Kinkaid had already set an ambush, lying in wait. At 2:20 a.m., Nishimura's formation was caught in a pincer attack by ambushing American PT boats. The Japanese destroyers Yamagumo and Michishio were hit by torpedoes. With their attack plan exposed, Nishimura didn't stop to engage but instead pushed north at full speed, trying to link up with Kurita's fleet. As he reached the middle of the Surigao Strait, Nishimura's flagship, the 34,000-ton battleship Yamashiro, was hit by successive torpedoes. After taking on a massive amount of water, its powder magazine exploded. At 3:40 a.m., the Yamashiro sank, taking Nishimura and his entire crew to the bottom of the sea. The captain of the other battleship, the Fuso, Rear Admiral Masami Ban, took command and continued the advance. But at 3:50 a.m., the 34,000-ton Fuso was suddenly hit by a storm of shells. The warship exploded, was engulfed in flames, and sank into the sea at 4:30 a.m. The heavy cruiser Mogami caught fire and was beyond saving. Admiral Shima's trailing formation, witnessing the carnage, beat a hasty retreat. With this battle, the Japanese threat from the south of Leyte Gulf was eliminated. Nishimura's formation lost two 30,000-ton class battleships, one heavy cruiser, and 3 destroyers. Shima's formation had 2 cruisers damaged. The Japanese suffered over 5,000 casualties. In contrast, the U.S. lost 1 PT boat, had a few destroyers damaged, and lost 41 sailors. On the morning of the 25th, Kurita's fleet raced southward, and the battle in the north was about to begin. Meanwhile, Halsey, lured by the bait, was charging toward the distant north. In the morning light, Kurita finally spotted the American naval fleet, which had received no warning, and immediately gave the order to attack. At that moment, one of the most powerful super battleships ever built by mankind charged ahead, leading the assault on the American escort carrier group. What makes a warship the most powerful super battleship in human history? First, it has to have overwhelming firepower. 3 triple-barreled 18.1-inch main guns, along with various secondary and anti-aircraft cannons, could handle any tough situation and cure anyone's fear of being undergunned. Second, its armor must be thick. The entire ship had to be covered in massive amounts of armor plating, with vital areas capable of withstanding hits from 18.1-inch shells. Even the smokestack was armed to the teeth, with honeycomb steel plates and protective armor on its openings and sides. If you had to ask which warship perfectly met these conditions, it would have to be the battleship Yamato, known as the Hotel Yamato, which cost a staggering 150 billion yen to build. At 7 a.m., the massive Yamato opened fire first. The sudden attack sent sailors on the escort carrier USS White Plains flying from the shockwave of the exploding shells. Kinkaid sent an urgent distress call to Halsey, but Halsey was focused on chasing Ozawa's decoy fleet and had no intention of providing aid. And so, the outnumbered American escort carrier group, Task Unit April 3rd, 77, desperately fled south with Japanese battleships in hot pursuit. To buy time, they used destroyer counterattacks and airstrikes, but they suffered heavy losses under the fire of the Japanese warships. The battle raged until around 9 a.m., when Kurita suddenly abandoned the chase and began heading for Leyte Gulf at full speed. With Kurita bearing down on Leyte Gulf, Kinkaid grew even more panicked. Over 80 transport ships were unloading cargo in the Gulf, and large numbers of landing troops were on the island. If Kurita's fleet managed to break into Leyte Gulf, the American defeat would be unimaginable. Would Kurita seize the opportunity and crush the American forces? The answer, of course, is no. Just 2 hours after heading toward Leyte Gulf, Kurita, due to a critical misjudgment of the intelligence, suddenly ordered his fleet to turn north, abandoning the plan to attack the Gulf. On the morning of the 25th, American planes spotted Ozawa's fleet east of Cape Engano, at the northeastern tip of Luzon, and a fierce battle ensued. Before long, Ozawa's flagship, the Zuikaku, was hit by 2 torpedoes and several bombs, losing its ability to navigate. The light carrier Zuho was also bombed and sunk. Ultimately, after receiving 9 urgent messages from the rear and a direct order from Admiral Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, Halsey finally broke off his attack to reinforce Leyte Gulf. When the attack ended, all 4 of Ozawa's light and heavy aircraft carriers had been sunk. The remnants of his fleet limped back to their base on Amami-Oshima. At this point, Japan's naval decision-makers were on pins and needles. With no other choice, they implemented the Operation Show 1 order from the Imperial General Headquarters. Show meant victory in a decisive battle. The Japanese High Command decided to stake everything on one last gamble. Only by fighting a decisive, destructive battle against the counter-attacking enemy can we turn the tide of the war. In response, every branch of the Japanese military drafted its own operational plans in a desperate last-ditch struggle. Facing defeat, was Japan's final secret weapon about to make its debut? What was this so-called secret weapon? And could it turn disaster into victory? On a dark and stormy night, Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, a close confidant of combined fleet commander Isoroku Yamamoto, tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Images of American ships and planes relentlessly bombing Japanese forces flashed through his mind. How could they fight back against such an enemy? Vice Admiral Onishi pondered this for a long time. Suddenly, the image of Lieutenant Fusada Ida appeared in his mind. Fusada Ida was a pilot in the Japanese Naval Air Service. On the first day of the Pacific War, during the attack on Pearl Harbor, after dropping all his bombs, he spotted an American aircraft hangar. He flew his plane straight into it, triggering a chain reaction of explosions in a special attack. On October 8th, Onishi formally submitted his special attack plan to the Naval General Staff. He proposed organizing volunteers for suicide attacks. They would pilot planes stripped of all escape devices and loaded with explosives, diving directly into their targets. The Naval General Staff praised the idea and appointed him commander of the 1st Air Fleet. The Japanese believed that, historically, the spirits of their Emperor Jimmu had stirred up a divine wind, or kamikaze, to help them repel foreign invaders. So, Onishi named his special attack unit the Kamikaze Special Attack Force. The 5th Base Air Force on Leyte had fewer than 100 aircraft, all of which were in poor condition. Most of the experienced pilots were dead, and the replacements were new recruits with shockingly poor flying skills. Given the desperate military situation, Onishi believed he had to use these planes with maximum efficiency. By organizing the fighter groups into kamikaze units, with each plane carrying a 550-pound bomb, and having them dive bomb American carriers, he thought it might be possible to halt the American advance and save the day. On the night of the 19th, Onishi gathered 24 elite pilots, led by Captain Yukio Seki, to form the 1st Kamikaze Special Attack Unit and join the Battle of Leyte. On the foggy morning of October 25th, the great naval battle in the Philippines' Leyte Gulf began. At 7:25 a.m., the Japanese commander at Mabalacat Airfield in the Philippines received an order. An American carrier task force was operating west of the Philippines, likely reinforcing the battle in Leyte Gulf. They had to immediately launch a devastating kamikaze attack on the U.S. carriers. At 8 a.m., Onishi dispatched his first 5 kamikaze planes to support the 1st striking force near Manila. At 10 a.m., the low-flying kamikaze planes slipped past radar and appeared over the American carrier USS Fanshawe Bay. A lookout spotted them and sounded the alarm. Just as American fighters were scrambling to intercept, the Japanese planes climbed to several thousand feet. A moment later, 5 Zero fighters came diving down, one after another, toward the carrier USS Kitkun Bay. As the first plane neared the deck, the American sailors thought it would pull up again. Instead, it slammed straight into the carrier's port side. Amid a massive explosion, the deck of the Kitkun Bay was showered with blood and shrapnel. Two other Japanese planes were hit by the ship's anti-aircraft fire as they tried to attack the Fanshawe Bay and exploded just before impact. Finally, the last two Zero fighters targeted the USS White Plains. Under a barrage of heavy fire from the carrier, both planes were hit. One of them crashed onto the flight deck of the USS St. Lo just as it was about to land. The intense fire caused a massive explosion, and the St. Lo was sent to the bottom of the sea. At the same time, another 6 kamikaze planes damaged 3 Allied aircraft carriers near Mindanao. Captain Yukio Seiki's unit also successfully crashed into Allied carriers and warships. On that day, the Kamikaze Special Attack Force deployed a total of 55 aircraft. They sank 1 U.S. carrier, heavily damaged 4 others, sank 1 cruiser and heavily damaged another, and sank or damaged several other smaller vessels. It was clear that this method of attack had a much higher hit rate than conventional tactics. That evening, Tokyo Radio broadcast the news of the Kamikaze Corps' successful first mission to the world. The next day, another kamikaze squadron wanted to show what they could do and get a taste of being heroes. This time, however, their attack was not as lucky as their comrades. The well-prepared American radar operators quickly detected their planes, and this kamikaze unit was swiftly annihilated by the wall of fire put up by the U.S. fleet. On October 26th, the Battle of Leyte Gulf concluded with Kurita's formation being attacked by air during its retreat. Japan had suffered a catastrophic defeat. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was the largest naval battle in history, with both sides committing a combined total of over 2 million tons of shipping. The Japanese lost 4 light and heavy aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, for light cruisers, 11 destroyers, and 6 submarines. They also lost 400 aircraft and suffered over 7,400 casualties. The Americans lost 1 light aircraft carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 cruisers, and 3 destroyers. They lost over 100 aircraft and had 2,800 casualties. After this battle, the Japanese Navy would never recover. Air and sea superiority in the Philippines was now firmly in American hands, laying the foundation for the subsequent occupation of the islands.